with something like this is relatively extreme. You can fix this with compression, but at some point with a live performance, like a classical piece like this, you actually want dynamicism, and compression, like every single decision that you will ever make as a mixing engineer, compression is a bit of a double-edged sword. Everything is. Every single decision you make, you have to sacrifice something to gain something, right? You turn something up, now it's too loud, you sacrifice the presence of something else in the mix. You, you move something to the left, and then you sacrifice the space that it used to take up on the right, so on and so forth. So a good mixing engineer, it's almost like, I don't know if anyone likes The Wizard of Earthsea. Has anyone ever read Ursula K. Le Guin? My God, I couldn't recommend her highly enough. Anyways, it's a book about wizards 30 years before J.K. Rowling wrote her books about wizard, the Harry Potter stuff. A friend of mine put it really well that Harry Potter uh, is is like John Williams. Sorry, J.K. Rowling is like John Williams, and Ursula K. Le Guin is like Gustav Holst. Like everything that J.K. Rowling did in the 90s and 2000s, which is fantastic, was taken from this 1960s series that Ursula K. Le Guin wrote about Earthsea. Anyway, the point is like when you get to a certain level as a wizard, you have tremendous power, but you actually learn about the equilibrium is more important than everything else. And it's kind of a dope concept. It's also in a bunch of other fantasy and anime and everything else that you can imagine. But this idea of balance and equilibrium and doing less in order to add more and bring things out. Same thing with compression. And we'll talk about compression more. But essentially what it means is you set a threshold of the gain. And if you look at this gain over here, right? If I set the threshold at -12, that means that every sound that's above -12 gets compressed a certain amount, and you can set the ratio. Maybe it's 4 to 1, meaning for every 4 dB, it's compressed to 1, right? It's compressed 4 times, 10 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, something like that. But it also means that nothing below -12 dB will get touched by the compression. That's basic compression, and then you can set parameters. So if you set that threshold way down here, that means that every single, so if I set it something ridiculous like -36, that means, actually let's go back to my original point. Let me finish this concept. If I set it at -12, then when I do something soft like this, and I'm really soft, then it's not touching my voice and it's natural. But then when I go loud, it touches it. Maybe -6 is a better threshold for that. So what it does is it makes sure it softens the highs, right? To make the lows hotter, because everything below -12 is going to be uncompressed, right? So it's basically going to keep everything in this range as opposed to letting it get above. That's essentially what you're doing. If I set this at -30, that means that every single sound that's coming out of my voice, or if I'm Bohan right now, everything's being compressed. Well, a compressed sound doesn't sound supernatural because it kind of like glues it to itself and shoves it together, right? If you compress an individual sound, I'm talking about. And so you might not like the sound that you get by compressing Bohan's sound that much. However, with all the settings on the compression plugin, you can push her forward. So you gain something. You were able to squish the dynamics by compressing it, by setting the threshold lower, so everything's compressed, so everything's a little bit more the same, yet it sounds a little bit more gray. It loses some of its color. Does that make sense? That's an oversimplification. So the other thing you can do, because essentially all compression is doing is it's an automated gain adjuster. So one thing I can do here on your mix is I go to trim, and remember trim is another word for automation, and I click volume. Alright, so I'm setting volume right here, and I'm going to zoom in right about here, and I'm going to try and, I'm going to right click, I'm going to, why is that not working? Come on, create new point. So I have a little point there that I can play with. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and then I have a little point here. I'm going to create a point there. I'm just going to grab this, I'm just going to lower it a little bit. Now you've already compressed, so it's already going to sound a little distorted. But let's say I push the volume and I want it to get a little bit softer, I can do that. And it won't be terribly noticeable, right? If you just do a slight thing like that, and if it's too noticeable, then do something like that, or set it. Basically, I'm trying to set the decrescendo when there's a crescendo happening. Does that kind of make sense? Or you can do the opposite. Let's say you got a great volume for the second half, which is quite raucous and loud, but your first half's too soft. So maybe with Jesse's piece we can do this. I'm going to set volume. Sorry, we haven't even listened to your piece yet, Jesse, and I'm just horsing around with it. So let's go right here, and we'll zoom in. And let's say right here, that's where I like it. Oops. There we go. Okay, I like the volume right there. So I'm going to create a point, and that's going to be my little watershed. So I'm not going to mess around with that. But with everything else, as I zoom out, I'm going to create a point here. And I'm just going to lift it. I'm going to lift this whole first section, and then I'm also going to set one here at the beginning. So the whole thing starts, and you can see as I'm moving, you see that little yellow box? I'm at 0.52 dB, now I'm at 2.7, now 3.12, da 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 da. Let's say I want it like 4.3 dB higher. So now this whole section is going to be louder, and then I bring it down there. And this is really obvious to do with Bohan's piece just because it's so obvious. The first half is soft and the second half is loud. If it's more dynamic than that, no pun intended, if it's more intricate than that, if there's more ups and downs, then you can draw it in, and then it's about how subtle can you be moving things up and down. You generally don't want to do too much automation with the volume because it just sounds like someone's messing around with the fader. Like your nephew just grabbed the volume and it's just like da 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 da, right? You want to be really subtle to draw these points if that's something that's like this piece, that it's so clear that there's a first half and a second half, right? Like a classical piece. The other thing you can do is you can literally split the track right there, and you can just increase the volume on this guy, right? So that they look a little more even. This is a little ridiculous, I'm kind of going quick. And then as you zoom in here, you can kind of fade in and fade out just a little bit here, but you've set the volumes pretty strong. And you won't hear that split. There won't be like an artifact, like or anything like that, because it's the same track. It's super smooth. You don't want to fade in or fade out. You don't want to crossfade because you're not bringing two separate things together. The sound of the room is going to be totally consistent. But if you don't smooth it out with the volume automation by bringing this down a little bit and this up a little bit and trying to preserve the naturalness of it, it'll sound a little funky. Cool? Does that make sense, Nicholas? That's sort of like hands-on, if I may, analog. Cool. Compression, which is essentially you're managing gain at that point. And there's a difference. So compression has a lot of benefits that aren't just gain control. Compression does a lot of stuff that glues the sound together, glues things together in the mix if you do bus compression, and pushes sounds forward. That's kind of, for my taste, that's what I really want to do, and smooths out some high peaks. But if you're starting to use compression to manage gain, I would almost rather you get into the weeds and find a way to automate it. Now remember, this isn't gospel that I'm giving you. This is the stuff that I've done as a mixing engineer myself. But if you talk to 10, and I'm not a professional mixing engineer, right? Let me be clear about that. I'm a saxophone player. So if you talk to 10 professional engineers and you gave them this piece, they're going to come up with, I promise you, 10 totally different strategies. Someone might manage the difference in sound with some sort of reverb bus. Someone might manage it with a gate. Someone might manage it with a limiter. Someone might manage it with EQ, because remember, EQ is gain control as a function of frequency bands, right? So there's a million different ways. In the analogy I was using, there's 10 different ways with all these 10 different people to do all this. So try the things that I'm telling you, and as you continue to mix, start to develop your own strategy for how to just get things to sound good, because remember, that's the goal. And the way that you make these decisions are, what do I love about this piece? How can I make it sound great? Any questions on all that? Let's check out Jesse's piece. So work your way back to Audio Movers, disconnect from Zoom, and I'll see you over there on the Audio Movers stream. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Get rid of this trim. Okay, here is Jesse's piece. It's a little soft in the mix. It's like kind of the opposite of Nicholas's problem, although here it's pretty good. So I might just sort of bump it a little bit with the volume. Okay, here we go. Looks like it starts back here. All right, move back over to Zoom. Let's chat. All right, so Jesse, nice mix. Couple thoughts. It seems like you used almost no reverb. That's fine. We haven't talked about reverb yet. And then it felt like you pushed Bohan a little bit to my left. I was sort of hearing her a little bit left of center. And the piano and Bohan were very close, which I liked that part. There was an intimacy to it. So I wonder if you can talk through a little bit about your mixing decisions, Jesse, if you're on.
Yeah, so I kind of panned Bohan a little bit to the left, and I tried to pan the piano slightly to the right because I wanted it to be more of like a live setting where like they were. I guess I was trying to do a little bit more space, so it would sound like kind of like a conversation between the violin and the piano.
I like that. That's cool. I like that very much. Hello? So yeah,
Oh
you
yeah,
literally picture them on stage together. You're like Bohan's a little bit over there, the piano's going to be over there. So you sort of wanted this back and forth. That's cool.
yeah. I wanted it to be a little bit more of a live sound, a little more like dynamic is before.
Mm, that's cool. Yeah, that's good. Um, any other thoughts on this mix, or some thoughts that you had, Jesse, listening to it?
I think it sounded good. I think in hindsight, I wish I kind of would have done more what Nick did and kind of made the violin more of the star because I think he did a really good job with that. Um, yeah, I think I maybe would have tried boosting like the higher frequencies of the violin and just kind of tried to bring that out a little bit more.
Mm. Yeah, that's smart. I like that a lot. This idea of like Bohan being a star as opposed to an even combination. Excuse me, even conversation. That's really cool. And again, this goes back to like what decisions are we making and why? Do we want a conversation or do we want Bohan to be the star? Other thoughts from Jesse or anyone else? No, that's great. Really cool. I like the strategy. I like the conversation you're having with the conversation that you set up and the decision making that you're doing. So let's move on to Sam Lai's mix and same place. So move on over to Audio Movers. I'll give you a second to disconnect and jump over there.
Steps Armstrong.
Yo,
For the Bohan stamps, which of them do we use? There's several of them. I think you made copies or something
they should all be there. Let me see.
because
I
there are 7 stamps.
Yeah, that's right. Two, four, five. Wait, let me look. Let's listen and then I'll look. Here's Sam Lies. Great, Sam. Let's go back over to Zoom for discussion. Great, I really liked it. Yeah, more reverb than Jesse did, not quite as much as Nicholas. So it kept some. It's like that balance equilibrium we've talked about. So there was still some intimacy there, but yet it still felt a little bit larger, nice space. Tell me about your pan strategy and what you went into this with. Like, what were your goals when you went into this mix?
For me, when I listened to it, for things like this, I tend to keep like the soloist. I like it in the center versus what Jesse did, where it was kind of like a live setting where one is a little bit off to the side. And then for the piano tracks, I pan them equally, one to each side. And then for the room, I kind of played with it a little bit, but panning it out farther, both tracks to either side, kind of, I think, I don't know, made it seem a little bit more full in the mix. And so, because it wasn't just, like piano or wasn't just violin, it was both of them together. So I felt, putting them out a little bit farther to the side, just kind of give it a little bit more space.
I like that. That's smart. So using the room mic to kind of push things out a little bit and also bring them like to bring the sounds together, but push the panning out. That's really nice. Yeah. So really nice strategy. Listening to it again now, Sam. Some thoughts that you have on your mix.
Um, I don't know. I definitely like looking at this wave file on there. It's like maybe a little bit hot on those louder sections, but
Sure.
it was strange listening through it a few times in my own session. It nothing clipped out until I rendered it, and I wasn't
Mm.
quite sure what was going on because I couldn't find where it was clipping out. So
And do you remember the how much it clipped out?
not much,
Like
but like
point
enough for
something.
me to see it, and I was like,
Yeah.
hello.
Yeah, if you could see it there, right? Like if you clip too much, like it'll
Hmm.
say your high water mark on Reaper, and it'll also say when you're rendering. If you're talking about less than a dB, it's almost guaranteed you won't hear it. If you do find out where it is, I mean, it's really as simple as hunting for it. So I would imagine like, you would isolate that section like that, and then maybe click, toggle repeat, and just jump right there and see if that's it. There you go. So it's right there. And if it's right
Hmm.
there, then try and turn down the whole track a little bit. But then if you lose, oh, and right here we saw it was plus, oh, 0. So you were right at the top. You just like went right to the edge. And I imagine this is going to be probably something too. So let's check this out. You're still at plus, there we go. So plus zero point 0.6, plus zero point 0.5. So literally what you can do is jump on automation right there and just make a little valley, right? So you make a little point on either side, and then you make a little control point on the edges. I would zoom in normally a little bit more, so let's do that. So now you can just grab this little guy and bring it down way less than that. I went -5. I want to go -0.2. Oh, come on. A little bit more. Let's do this. This is like mouse control. -0.8. That sounds nice. Let's hear that. Right? I literally got it to where, ooh, it pushes right there. Anyways, I won't continue to do this. But that's part of mixing is that tediousness. So maybe draw a little more guy right there. And your ear isn't really hearing point 0.5, point 0.6, point 0.8, even 1 dB. You won't really hear that dip, especially if you draw it elegantly. Again, your first thing is you want to act globally. You want to act large scale. But if you just have a couple of little nuisance spots that just keeps pushing, and you don't want to lower the whole track anymore, and you don't want to offset the two sections that much more, you can just draw it in. And I can't tell you how many mixing sessions I've done or that I've sat in on in a professional setting where they just find those clips and they just bloop, they just kind of carve them out with automation. Again, you don't want your whole session to be constantly automated because not only does it not sound great, but it's a pretty huge stress on your CPU to do automation everywhere. It's asking a lot of your computer. So it'll take a while to bounce. It'll just the file will just balloon at some point. But for something like your mix where I think the volume of the whole thing is really nice, then I would just find those moments and carve them out. Any other thoughts on that? Does that make sense? All right, let's try Brendan's. Brendan, oh, more chat? No. Okay, so real quick about the stems. Uh, I remember what I did here. So this is the stems of Bohan. If you look at them, come on. Oh, I see what's happening. Uh, so this one is piano channel 1, piano channel 2. That's the right and the left separated. if you want to play around with that, and this is stereo. So the reason there's 7 is there's a stereo piano and a right and a left channel, and there's a stereo room here, which I can't get to because there you go. So that's the stereo room 103s, and then room 103 channel 2, room 103 channel 1. Those are the right and the left channel because they're both stereo channels, stereo mics. And then Bohan herself, the violin, is individual. So if you want, you could just upload the stereo room and the stereo piano, and then you can separate them yourself if you want to split them. You know, Jesse talked about doing that. I forgot, Sam, did you end up splitting the right and the left channel of either piano or room and doing interesting stuff with the pan?
I just use the separate channels the separate stems that you already provided, rather than going in and taking the stereo track and splitting it myself, since it was already split. So,
Yeah, that was the idea there. Is I think I showed you how to split a stereo track into mono, and likewise you can take take a stereo and turn it into 2 monos, and likewise you can take a mono and turn it back into stereo, 2 monos. And if you forgot how to do that, that's on one of the previous lectures, or you can just Google it. But that's what's going on with the 7 stems, is it's just giving you those options. Okay, let's check out. I tell you what, actually, Brendan and I talked a little bit about his mix. Sorry, Brendan, I think you're listening on the live stream, but I'm going to move on to something else to talk about last minute. We didn't have a chance to get into, oops, 2 things. Let me make a little track for you. Those of you on Zoom, you guys are fine, but for the people on the live stream, I'm just going to keep this going. Okay, so this is a last minute setup, and this is, you have all of these stems inside of that stems for practice mix folder, and this is what it looks like. You have a 914 mic. Why are they gone? Oh, that's right. That's dumb. Okay, that's a dumb thing that just happened, but pretend they're all there. So you have a 914 overhead mic, you have a snare drum mic, you have a kick D112 mic, bass, keyboard. There's 2 bass and there's 2 keyboard, right? So I want you to try and build this session. Remember, these mixes due on Thursday. We can talk a little bit more about it on Tuesday. And maybe what we'll do on Tuesday is we'll kind of do a deep dive, talk about Steely Dan, and we'll also talk about the other 2 albums. Blue Train and Silk Road Ensemble, and we'll just do like a listening hang, and then also go back to this stem thing and talk over how to put this session together. But you're going to download everything into here, and you're just going to drag all these files in, right? There will be audio in them when you do it. And then I would separate the colors. So the first 3 I just highlighted and set the colors to some random color. You can color code if you want. Set the bass tracks to 1 and set the keyboard tracks to a different one. And that's how I like to look at it. Everyone has their own different strategy. I like my drums up top, my bass right next to them, and the keyboards below them, right? Does that make sense? Let's check out this chat real quick. Oh, I just uploaded the Dallas ones today. I haven't put the Katie ones in, Sam. Thanks for asking that. But yeah, just before class today, I threw up all these Dallas stems, but they should be there for you. And this is just because something is funky on the computer. It's been deleting stuff, and I know why. I'll fix it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about routing. This is a bit of a recovering ground that we talked about last week. But remember, what I like to have is all of my live tracks, my active tracks here, and then all my bus passive tracks there on the right, on the bottom, and I like to put them fire engine red so they're super clear to look at. I can't recommend busing high enough for this. In fact, I'm just going to require doing it so you can practice what it's like to bus. And let's go over how to do this again. So remember, this first track is just my live mic, so that's not going to be in your mix. We're going to click on routing for the drum overhead. We turn off the master send. We're going to go to drum bus, right? And you're going to have to set up these bus tracks by just adding tracks. Control T, add a track, and you don't have to specify what kind of track it is because that's how Reaper likes to do it. You're just going to give it stuff. Go to drum bus, take off the master send. Kick, go to drum bus, and take off the master send. So now all three of my active drum parts are being filtered into my drum bus. And I can see that with the colors. That middle color yellow means that it's sending, active is sending to passive. And here on my drum bus, that blue on the right means it's receiving tracks, and the green on the left means it is going to the master send. With all of that, that's going to help you mix mostly in your buses. Any kind of plugins you're going to put on your bus. You want to add some sort of compression to the whole drum set, you put it on the drum bus. You want to add reverb to just the bass, two bass things together, add it to the bass bus. You can still add things to your individual tracks, like you want to EQ your bass, your kick drum, and we can talk about that on Tuesday. You might want to EQ a little bit out on the bass microphone because it might have picked up too much drum set, stuff like that. But then most of your main decisions are going to be happening here on your buses, which filter to your master fader, which you're going to add stuff to that if you want to add like a room sound or a master compression. So play around with the routing this weekend, and on Tuesday, I'll think about how I want to design the lecture, but maybe we'll chat about music over the first half, maybe the first 20 minutes, and then spend a bulk of time going over this mix and ways that we can utilize compression, reverb, EQ, and stuff with a more complicated session like this one. Any last questions before we depart for the day? Okay, great. So I am going to be doing some recording actually like right now. If you are interested and you want to come play with some microphones, and we're going to be using that mobile rig, just stop on over to the recording studio, room 245 in the Fine Arts, and I'd love an extra pair of hands. So if you want to do it, and for those of you that are doing the internship, this will count towards your intern hours. All right, take care. See you guys on